So you've completed your foundational programming, gotten to know your client, you've determined a bit of the concept, you've done an adjacency and criteria matrix, and maybe you've dabbled a little with mood boards and finished sample boards. Now it's time to start visualizing what the actual space is going to look like inside of the building. Now we don't just hop right into the fire and start drafting walls and doors and windows in AutoCAD. There's actually a transitional step or process that allows us to have a chance to play with different space configurations to find the one that best suits the users and the building. So this process is called space planning. Now, all the programming steps I just mentioned are the foundational steps of space planning, and so now we're going to move forward a little bit into the meat of space planning, which is your bubble and blocking diagrams. Now I'm going to be showing you how to create a bubble diagram in the next video, but first let's go over some general knowledge and information about the anatomy of bubble diagrams for interior design. Now, bubble diagrams give us a quick and efficient way to visualize the size of the space, as well as the activity connections between each space. Designers do not typically use software programs to create bubble diagrams. It simply just takes too long to create them. And if you're being billed by the hour, your client is not going to appreciate paying you for the extra time it takes to draw on the software. So always complete your bubble diagrams on paper. Now, most designers prefer trace paper. It's cheaper than paper and makes more economical sense. Designers also typically use markers because it makes drawing quick and easy to see. The bubbles are simply circles that represent rooms or spaces in the building that you are designing for. Many times designers use circle templates to keep these bubbles looking professional and well constructed. Even though these bubble diagrams are not used in any contract, nor are they typically viewed by the client, as designers we should always strive to create professional looking documents. So even when you're practicing behind closed doors, always keep your bubble diagrams looking sharp and organized. Now, you don't have to use a template, but just do your best to make the circles look good. Some designers like to give it a sketchy, kind of architectural look. You just find the look that best suits you, but remember that nobody likes a messy designer. Now, the size of the bubble is representative of the size of the space. So it is just simply a representational aspect, and it can change as you start creating bubble diagrams, but it should still represent the same kind of ratio or size when compared to other bubbles. So for instance, a dining room in a restaurant is typically larger than the bathrooms. So be sure to draw a larger bubble in your bubble diagrams for the dining area and a smaller bubble for the restrooms. This is not a perfect science, and don't worry too much if you have a hard time with this part at first. Practice is going to make perfect. Some people use colored bubbles to represent things like public versus private spaces. Some people draw in black ink or marker only, and you're free to choose the method that works best for you. I kind of suggest drawing first with black ink or marker, and then add colors as you so need to. Activity connections are those lines that are drawn in between the two bubbles that show how important those two rooms or spaces are to each other. So the activity connection line represents the colored circles of your adjacency matrix. And what you see in the adjacency matrix, you should see in the same connection in your activity line. So in general, immediate adjacency is shown in a dark thick line. Spaces that are to be placed near each other but maybe don't have that immediate adjacency need are shown with a thick unfilled line. Spaces that have some to little adjacency needs are shown with a single thin line, and spaces that have no relation to each other whatsoever do not have any activity connection lines drawn between them. Now, one general guideline with activity connections is to not cross the lines. Now think of Ghostbusters. Don't cross the streams, or dogs and cats are going to start living together, and that would be mass hysteria. Remember that we are starting to plan out where the rooms or spaces are going to be located within a building, and two spaces that have any kind of connection should not be on opposite sides of the building. They need to be in close proximity to each other. So by not crossing the activity connection lines, it forces us to work within the realms of reality. Now, additional connection lines can be drawn, and that would be like for spaces that have specific acoustical needs, plumbing needs, daylight window view kind of needs. or any other project-specific needs. So for instance, if a space has specific acoustic needs, you can draw a squiggly line either around the entire circle of that space, maybe part of the circle, or along with the activity line connecting to the room to indicate which room it needs acoustical privacy from. If you want a space to have a window, a view, or daylight, simply draw an arrow from the circle pointing outwards. Plumbing could be a zigzag line. Last but not least is indicating where the entrance to the space is by drawing a big, thick arrow with the words entrance pointing at the room where you feel the entrance doors are most likely to be located. Be sure to include your legends with your bubble diagram so that your colleagues or your instructor can know and understand what symbols or colors mean what on your diagram. It's also important, if you have to shelve a project for a year or two and come back to it, that you can understand your own diagrams as well. Now, it's important to understand that these bubble diagrams will need to be developed over several sheets. It's really hard to get a space plan correct the first time. Spaces have very intricate needs and intricate relationships with each other. So the idea is that you start really simple. Maybe you start by dividing the public spaces from the more private spaces. You can also start by trying to draw each shape with an appropriately sized circle. Once you have those concepts down, you can start adding the activity connection lines. You can always start too with very general areas or the areas that you know have immediate adjacency needs. So for instance, at a restaurant, you know that the waiting room, the hostess, and the dining room have very high adjacency needs. So you start by drawing those three, and then you start adding on as you need to add rooms for the rest of the space. You may find yourself struggling to not cross the connection lines, and that's how you know that the space planning still needs more development. A typical set of bubble diagrams is between 3 to 7 sheets, kind of depending on how many rooms that you're trying to plan. Make notes on those first few drawings as to what you see working well and what you see not working so well. Showing your thought process is an important part of the whole process as it is. The idea is that you take your notes and drawings and redraw a better spatial diagram on the next sheet. There are many goals of bubble diagrams, and one such goal is to see if there is a significant, straightforward pattern of movement from the entrance of the building to the other side. Another goal is to see what rooms should be more centralized in the space so that multiple spaces can have the appropriate adjacency to them. The ultimate goal, is to place your more finalized bubble diagrams inside the shell of a building and expand the bubbles into blocks that represent walls in the space. That means the bubbles are now becoming more rectangular and representational of the actual shape the space is going to be once it gets drafted in the floor plan. It's still a simple, kind of rudimentary look, but now you are starting to see how the bubbles relate to the shape and configuration of the building, keeping in mind any of those window, daylighting needs, plumbing needs, acoustical needs, etc., etc., etc. You also start to see how the egress paths, which are like your corridors and your hallways, how they naturally form between the spaces. The blocking phase can also be 3 to 7 sheets, depending on the needs of the project and how the development of your space is going. Now, it's important to understand that oftentimes our first design is not our best design, just like getting married or trying on wedding dresses. How many of you are going to end up marrying that first person that you ever dated? I mean, are you even still together with that person? If not, why aren't you? I'm sure you have a really long list of reasons why you're not still with that person, but it's probably really because that person didn't have all the qualities that you were looking for in a significant other. And so let's look at the wedding dress issue. How many of you are going to choose the very first wedding dress that you try on without trying on any others? Why not? Usually the answer is because your body has a possibility of looking good in a lot of different styles, so you're not going to know until you try a few on. So it's the same for space planning. The adjacency and criteria matrix helps you get the general idea of how the space is going to be configured, but there are more than one way to configure a space. Meaning a building might have 7 rooms, but those 7 rooms could be placed very differently within the building. and their placement can have different outcomes for better or worse. So generally, a designer tries to do at least 3 different bubble diagrams per project, allowing for 3 different configurations to choose from. Designers can either choose one configuration they like best, or they combine ideas from the 3 configurations into a final configuration. The point is, don't marry the first person that you date, don't try on only one wedding dress, and don't create an entire design based off of your first and only space planning ideas. Date around a little, have some fun shopping, get creative, and play with ideas. Now, can you marry the first person or try on only one wedding dress? Sure. Those people are exceptions. When it comes to space planning, the people who have the exception are those who have been space planning for a very long period of time. So just remember that good space planning is an art and a science. It requires exploration, creativity, and trial and error. Never be afraid to dirty up a piece of paper or trace paper. It was made for you to get it dirty with your thoughts, expressions, and planning.